Good evening. I am Steve, and this is my rock and metal life. And it's been a little bit. It's been over a month since I've posted anything up on the channel. And the odd thing about that is with the new year and everything else, I had all these ideas and all these things I was going to do and people I was going to talk to, and none of it's happened until tonight. So here we are, actually getting towards the end of January, just about. And I am here to talk about a book that I just read. And this would be Lay It on the Line, the biography of Rik Emmett, who's the songwriter, guitar player, singer of Triumph. He, along with Gil Moore and Mike Levine, were the three-man band from Canada. And one of my absolute favorite bands. I've got a couple videos up already just about Triumph in general, and I think I did an anniversary for when I saw him on the Never Surrender tour. And everybody knows Van Halen's the top of my food chain. Triumph is probably the next one right behind there. I've had periods in my life earlier when, I was borderline religious about Ozzy. He was probably my second favorite band for a while. And then the Cars, I was a huge fan of the Cars up until Heartbeat City came out. And then I kind of went towards heavier stuff. But Triumph jumped into that gap, and Triumph's pretty much been right there behind Van Halen for me as far as just a band that really means a lot to me. Play them a lot. Love their music. Very unique band, especially in that era. If you want to look at the mid to late 70s, what the music scene was then, all the way up until towards the end of the 80s when Triumph kind of ran its course, there really wasn't anybody like them. They had pretty much their own vibe, and a lot of their music, it's whichever way you look at it, there's a lot of positive, uplifting, good energy associated with their music. And you've got Gil Moore, the drummer, had the more powerful, heavy rock voice, and he sang, 24 hours a day. And he had a bunch of really good party songs. I Live for the Weekend, stuff like that. And he could really belt out, a powerful anthemic kind of tune. Rik, he had, a really powerful but also very high-pitched voice, and his writing was always along the lines of keeping a positive attitude, uplifting, I guess you could say, magic power, fight the good fight, stuff like that. And over the course of Triumph's career, we had, good time, party time bands. Van Halen is kind of known as one of those, but in the mid to late 80s, we had Poison come along, and, there were other bands that had this like, positive, happy, not dark, not street, but, good time rock image. And Triumph doesn't really fit in with those guys. It was a little bit different. Triumph was, kind of progressive, and a little more, not just crazy over the top with, songs about decadence or anything like that. The partying was having a good time, celebrating. It wasn't, let's tear this place down. So anyway, that's just a little snapshot of Triumph. I've talked about them before. All that being said, on a personal level, I really don't know much about these guys. And part of that is that they weren't out there like, somebody like, Madonna, Michael Jackson. Obviously they didn't achieve that level. But even so, like on the rock scene, they were absolutely entrenched like all the other successful bands. They did the writing and the recording, and then get out there and tour, and then write and record again. And they churned out albums, and they toured successfully. They did arenas. The 2 times I saw them, they were in good sized arenas, and they were successful, and they were very much in the game along with everybody else, but they didn't really take that turn where, like, individually they weren't everywhere, like Billy Idol was for a stretch, like Axl Rose was. They weren't, you didn't turn on your MTV and, oh, there's Rik Emmett again. It didn't happen that way for them. And it's just, it kind of explains it in the book. The way they went about their business. Gil and Mike were very much like promoting the band and doing the business end of the thing. And they were great at it. They were, visionary really in some of the things they did, including building Metalworks Studio. And Rik was the singer-songwriter and, incredible live performer. And, that's Triumph. And when you read this book, for me, it gave me a lot of information I didn't know. And as familiar as I feel, we all feel like these, we buy the records, we know all the words, and we feel like we know these people, and we don't. We don't know what they're like, when they're not making the music. We don't know anything about them. And Rik, boy, I've sat on this for a couple weeks because it's really hard for me to explain what I came away from with this book. It's good, it's positive. But I read a lot of biographies. Okay, I read a lot of rock music biographies. Here we got Sammy Hagar, we've got Peter Grant, the manager of Led Zeppelin. We got K.K. Downing, we got David Lee Roth, Rob Halford, Tony Iommi, Alice Cooper. All of these books, you get, the history of the bands that they were in and the history of their careers and stuff like that. And then some of them more than others, Alice Cooper gives you a lot of, how did he go from being a guy that, was basically in horrible health, his life's basically in danger because of his lifestyle, doing all these weird things, and then he ends up, he plays golf, he's a runner. His book's called Golf Monster. And, he gives you a lot of perspective as to how, how did he end up that way? What was his path? So you find out a lot about his life. And everybody really, the David Lee Roth book, people criticize it. Oh, it's a bunch of rambling, blah, blah, blah. Well, you get to hear everything that had gone on up to that point in the career, and you see Diamond Dave. You see it. You hear it from his perspective. And, Rob Halford, there's another guy that he's got quite a story to tell. And a big part of his book is that he was forced to hide the fact that he was gay for all those years. And then in the late 90s, he came out publicly. And now he's in a lot better place, and he's feeling good publicly. You see him, and he's a really happy guy, and a lot of that's in his book. Rik, I would say this is such a really good example of a book where, he tells you so much about himself. I mean, and of course you've got the chapter with his, his family history and how he grew up, and the house he grew up in and all that stuff. And you've got the whole, the first bands he was ever in, and then how he got with the Triumph guys. And that's all good and fine. But man, he's got the chapters in this book, he lays out essentially what he thinks, how he feels about things, how he looks at things, and the creative process, and on and on and on. And it is an absolutely fascinating read. And I will tell you one thing that I worry about with these books is I don't want someone to tell me how I should live, what I should think, that kind of thing. I love reading beyond just, how did you write this song and what was that tour like? I like going beyond that. And I like getting a look at who these people really are and what they'll tell you about themselves. And what Rik tells us about himself is unique to him. In all the reading I've done, these aren't the only books I've read. I've read a ton of others. Jimi Hendrix on up, all throughout history. And boy, Rik is very much, I mean, I had to write down some notes for this. He's a guy, like he's a creative artist, a performer, okay, but he also, when he got out of the Triumph scene, and he was basically an independent artist for all these years, he became an educator, and he taught at college, and he taught a lot of the things that he knows about music and the music business, and he puts a lot of that stuff into here, and it's just fascinating. It's really interesting, and it colors the book. He speaks very much like an educator. He speaks like it's not I got a feeling kind of stuff. He's got an explanation for a whole lot of things, but then he also has like inspiration moments, just like everybody else. And I'm doing a terrible job. I know I am, but it's an amazing book. And I was caught off guard at the beginning. I read the very beginning, and I thought, man, where is this going? And I actually like I took a pause for a couple of days, and I thought, because I have a fear of someone, you see a biography on TV or you read it, and then this guy's not who you thought they were all these years. And I at the beginning, like his origin stories and all that, and talking about how his family grew up, and I this is probably just me. I don't think anyone else needs to be cautioned by this, but I read some stuff where I thought, oh boy, this might be preachy. This might be, I don't know, just something I didn't really want out of all this. And I didn't necessarily just want the Triumph story either. I did want to know beyond that. And he's had a long career as a solo artist after he left Triumph. But the beginning, it was just a little bit of a strange feel for me. And it's hard for me to explain it beyond that. But, I bought this as soon as it came out, and I read it quickly. But at the beginning, I was thinking, oh man, I hope it's, and it's not his fault if my image is not who he is. It's not his fault at all. But anyway, I went on to read, the whole book, and it's fine. My fears at the beginning were, really just my mind kind of going crazy. And he's got, what is it? The first 4 chapters, I think, are like basically his upbringing and how he got to Triumph. And then he's got one chapter that's called the Triumph chapter. And he tells that story pretty well. He doesn't go into gory details of the breakup. He explains what led to it, and that partnership was, it was like a lot of bands. It worked in the beginning, and at the end everything wasn't the same. And he would be outvoted 2-1 on certain things. And there was, he had his ideas of how to do things. It's kind of the oldest story in the music business, and it's kind of not at the same time. Because it's got particulars just specific to these guys. So he leaves Triumph, and the next chapters after that, he's got the music biz, and he's got the art of music, and he's got experiences, choices. And I mean, from this point on, this stuff is just gold. It is, he writes so well, and his thought process and his perception of things, and his compass that guides him to do things, he really lays it out. And I'll tell you right now, I have to look up a lot of words, in this book. And, like I say, I read a lot, and I feel like my vocabulary is pretty good. And man, this guy's, he's using things that words I've never heard of. And I looked them up, and I kind of feel like that's on point with him. I as an educator, I think he would love for people to look up, a new word that they don't know and find out what it means and probably use it the next day, But anyway, the way he lays everything out is just so eloquent. And he's, I'm sure you could disagree with what he thinks about this, that, or the other, but it's just fascinating reading. It really is. And he does a whole lot of, I don't think I'm any more important than anyone else. And then he lays out something that's just like brilliant, just like, and it's great. I think, I just loved reading it. The experience choices, I think The Art of Music was probably one that really, he's got an odd perspective about a song. Like when you write a song, it's a snapshot of that time, but then over time the song can change, and he's perfectly fine with if the song means something different to you than it does to me and that it does to him. And over time the song should change. It's very it's hard for me to understand people on this level, how the music is to them. I just watched a podcast today where a couple of guys were talking about how the music comes and finds the artist and channels through them, and it's up to the artist to be on their, to have the work ethic and the dedication to make that piece of art come out the way it should come out. And that's fascinating to me as a guy that sits here and tries to learn how to, essentially paint by numbers, trying to learn how to play a guitar and try to learn how to play music. And people like this they have a different calling. I mean, I can tell you right now, I'm not one of them. I know that for a fact. But Rik's take on all that is just incredibly worthwhile. I think anybody who's got an interest in music, an interest in guitar, songwriting, that kind of thing, I mean, his take is really fantastic. He's got a section called Gig Stories, and he talks about George Benson. He talks about Steve Vai, Steve Morse, and he's got some heroes that I'm not familiar with. Chet Atkins I am familiar with, but that's just one of his big time influences and one of his favorites, and he got to jam with him. So that's a pretty good, if you're looking for the music side of, the experiences, if you want to hear the lore, that's a good chapter to read. Perspectives. This chapter pretty much covers his solo stuff, and he's got, I think it's like 14 solo records. All I ever got was his first one, right after he left Triumph, late 80s, maybe 1990. I'm not sure. I think this is 1990. It's called Absolutely, and he had a stretch where he did like hard rock ones, and then he ventured off into his various interests in music, and he made a concept album, and then towards the end he came back and he did hard rock again, with Res 9, and anyway, he just goes through all of those, and I'm unfamiliar with those. I'm not even familiar with this thing. I can't remember anything except the first song, Drive Time. But it was still good reading because his writing comes from where it comes from for him, which is just fascinating to listen to, in my opinion. And then he's got Guitar, which talks about, guess what? Oh, you know what? I skipped. Perspectives went into songwriting. This chapter was just. This is where I mentioned a little bit ago about how he feels like what inspires him and stuff like that. This thing is amazing because he pulls in, what he thinks about so many things. It's just that's probably the creative process and all that. It just, I could listen to him, if he had a video where he just talked about it, I could listen to it, on and on for hours. Really good stuff in there in the songwriting chapter. And then that's when he's got the guitar. And then he's got philosophical advice. And again, this is more, like I say, at the beginning of the book, I was concerned, oh my God, this guy's going to tell me how to live my life. Is that what we're doing here? Oh man. And And I look back at the beginning and I don't really see why I had that concern so much. But by the time you get to this at the end of the book, philosophical advice, it's beautiful. It's just, for me, it was just, his way of looking at things and knowing he's not perfect and appreciating the experiences he's had, everything, it's really good. And then Portrait of an Artist, he really wraps it up. It's kind of a look back. And this thing is a look back at his life and his career and his, himself as a person as well as an artist, and how they overlap and how they are the same thing here and there. You know what I mean? Just like he writes what channels through him the way he thinks and feels about things. And again, it's so strange. I feel like I know almost everything about David Lee Roth, and of course I don't, because he's kind of like, in character all the time. And, Ozzy Osbourne, I think we've all kind of gotten a view of him. If that's really him, the way he acts, whenever you see him on camera, then, we all kind of have him pegged, Rik, I didn't, I'm not surprised that this came out like this, but I didn't know that this book was going to read like this. This past year was the 40th anniversary of the US Festival. And of course they were on that bill, and a lot of people say they were one of the best bands that day. And so he did a lot of press around that. And in fact, I think that's when I knew this book was going to come out. I think he mentioned something about it on those interviews. And he had talked about, hey, I just felt like, you can be happy or you can be unhappy. It's up to you. You can make choices. I wanted to put out there that you can and should be, a happy person and spread happiness to others. And, he said as a band, everybody else wore black. Well, he wanted to wear white. He didn't want to follow that trend just because he's in the business and, that kind of thing. And so, I know that about him, prior to reading this book. And again, I feel like I kind of got him, I've understood and all that. And hey, he's like not just more educated, more thoughtful, more, his personal philosophy obviously fits into his outlook, but he's a deep thinking guy, and it's I think he's living a pretty good existence, and he doesn't want to go through life, being a negative to anybody, and the way he wrote his music and the way he puts it out there, it feels like reading this book, he doesn't have any regrets. Like he did it just the way he wanted to do it. And that includes the fact that nothing's perfect, nothing, there's the career, there it is. There's my life in music. And he mused about the fact that, he left Triumph, and then he went down this road where he made all these other records. And, now, because the industry really did, evolve and change to where a lot of what he knew maybe isn't pertinent, to teach people and so forth. And he said that his entire career, his entire musical life's work it could be a subfolder on some guy's phone, and he has a realistic view of the whole thing, it seems like. So I really like this book. I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to anybody if you're a Triumph fan. If you're just a fan of, music, guitar, composition, there's a lot of stuff in here to like. So, hey, once again, all these years later, Rik Emmett, thanks, man. Gave me even more, even more to enjoy beyond all the great music. And I'll probably visit the solo stuff as well. It's going to take some time. I'm still enjoying the Triumph stuff. I've got a couple records that I never bought on CD that I've purchased just recently, and I'm going through those. But now I've got some insight into the solo stuff, so I'm probably gonna follow along down that road. But anyway, Rik Emmett, Lay It on the Line. Really good book. I highly recommend it.